The UN General Assembly is the world's largest diplomatic stage. When Donald Trump made his debut there today, you could hear the sabers rattling.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
Once again, Trump mocked North Korean leader Kim Jong-un by calling him Rocket Man and threatened annihilation. The head of the UN called for cooler heads on both sides.
Fiery talk can lead to fatal misunderstandings. We must not sleepwalk our way into war.
So what is the path forward? Is this a turning point? Stephanie Carvin is an assistant professor of international affairs at Carleton University. She's in Ottawa. And Saeed Khan is a professor in the Department of Near East and Asian Studies at Wayne State University in Michigan. He joins us from Detroit. So, Saeed, I'm going to start with you. It's some pretty unusual language from the U.S. president today. Should he be taken seriously?
Well, as the President of the United States, I think by definition he should be taken seriously. And unfortunately, the language that he used from the pulpit of the UN General Assembly is unfortunately very distracting, calling a world leader, Kim Jong-un, a rocket man, with a reference to an Elton John song, and to, in fact, use such hyperbolic language to say that the U.S. would totally destroy North Korea shows an agenda that is devoid of diplomacy, it is devoid of professionalism, and is going to cause some severe strains on those countries whom we would need to form a coalition and to be allies in any kind of effort against North Korea to curb its nuclear weapon system. What
was your opinion listening to that, Stephanie?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. My concern, though, is largely that, we can look at Trump and say, should we take him seriously? Is he just trying to joke? But it's not really us that we have to worry about. It's Kim Jong-un. There is a consensus among experts on North Korea that, his priority is survival. That is Kim Jong-un. And he will only use his nuclear weapons if he's convinced that, the survival of his regime is actually in doubt. So when Trump, it's not that he's using this language for the first time, but the fact that he's reinforcing this language may be creating the impression in North Korea that, he could be serious about launching some kind of attack, which would be very dangerous.
Saeed, it was a bit of a mixed message today. He was dissing the UN, he was dissing allies like China, but he was also asking for support or saying that the world should rally around a hard line on North Korea. How is that going to go over? Where does that lead?
Well, I think what President Trump was really revealing was perhaps what goes on inside the mind of President Trump. I'm not sure that he understands the nuances, the complexities of not just the global stage, but also American foreign policy. There are several moving parts. He may be critical of, he may be dismissive of the United Nations, but it is the United Nations that is still used and deployed when it comes to trying to have sanctions and a diplomatic solution. Even the president, notwithstanding his rhetoric, does not want to have an immediate military confrontation, but he has to contend with China and Russia, two similar members of the UN Security Council with veto power like the United States. The sanctions that have now been implemented against North Korea, Trump was complaining are a bit too watered down, but again, this shows that diplomacy has to be used and everybody's not on the same page on the tactics that need to be used against North Korea. Trump needs those kinds of alliances, needs that kind of consensus.
And yet today, Saeed, we saw people rolling their eyes.
Absolutely, and I think that this is something that now people are seeing for the first time. Trump is addressing the United Nations. They have been privy to his rhetoric when it comes to the campaign as well as the inauguration address, and we see that the speech at the UN was shockingly consistent to that. But at the same time, we're talking about geopolitics, not the domestic base to which he has to appeal. And to go ahead and call out leaders in the way that he has, to be critical of institutions as well as nations, is not a strategy that is going to bode well for the United States, nor for the rest of the international community to maintain its confidence in the United States.
Stephanie, he did lay out a worldview. It was a long speech, and there are fans. I mean, that message of America first, of let's be tactical here, has some resonance.
Domestically, that absolutely played to his base. But it's interesting, this is actually not the first time he's tried to take America first to a non-American audience. He tried similar steps with NATO, which was a bit of a disaster, again in Warsaw earlier this year. Even if the speech was somewhat incoherent, this was probably the most coherent version of it. Simply because I would say he anchored this idea of America first in sovereignty, and he really played to this idea that, you know, America first is about state sovereignty. He wants other countries to be strong sovereign nations as well. The idea that Trump is putting forward is, you know, kind of a radical interpretation of sovereignty, that we don't really interfere in any other states. And this is a line that, you know, Russia, China, even some of the states he criticized, such as Venezuela and Cuba, have argued that, you know, you have no right to kind of interfere with us. We want to determine our own destinies. So it was kind of a really interesting approach that way. And even if the speech overall was contradictory in the sense that talked about sovereignty, but then talked about interfering in Venezuela, for example, it really, there was this idea there that put forward that, you know, what we're looking at now is kind of almost kind of an illiberal internationalism, that it's no longer about working together.
To two quick points before we wrap up here, Saeed. He was also suggesting he'll withdraw from the nuclear deal with Iran. How big a deal is that?
Well, it's a big deal because then it runs the risk of destabilizing the region. That was a deal that was brokered not just with the United Nations, but with the so-called P5+1, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany. It'll be interesting to see how the other countries operate with that. President Emmanuel Macron, for example, was much more receptive to maintaining the deal. It provides pressure on Iran, and of course, Iran has been fully compliant with the deal. So I think President Trump is going to find a little bit more resistance than he was hoping for when it comes to simply scuppering this deal and starting from scratch.
And Stephanie, last point quickly. Justin Trudeau, he's going to be there on Thursday. What's his role? What should we expect from him?
Well, this is his opportunity to kind of finally carve out a vision for what Canada is going to do with the United Nations. We are in a very different time from 2015. So, you know, Trudeau still has to deliver on peacekeeping. He still has to deliver on, you know, is Canada going to go for a UN Security Council chair? But also this would be an opportunity for him, of course, to talk about some of his familiar themes as well, which would be climate change, of course, and perhaps even addressing the Rohingya crisis that that Chrystia Freeland and he has spoken out on earlier this week.
Well, it was quite a day. More to come. Thanks so much to both of you, Saeed Khan in Detroit and Stephanie Carvin in Ottawa. Thanks.
Thank you.